There's a moment, a quiet, powerful moment when he sees you again. Not broken, not bitter, but glowing, whole, peaceful. And in that instant, something shifts. You've moved on, and not just on the outside. He sees it, he feels it, and trust me, it does something to him. Let's talk about what really happens in a man's mind and heart when he realizes you're no longer waiting, no longer hurting, and certainly no longer available to be re-injured. Not from bitterness, but from healing. Not from hate, but from wholeness. This is deeper than revenge. It's transformation. When a man sees that you've truly moved on peacefully, without fanfare, without drama, and without the need to announce it, he's not just seeing a woman who's healed. He's seeing the stark contrast between the life he thought you'd live without him and the one you're actually living. And for many men, especially those who once held psychological power in a relationship, that contrast becomes unbearable. You have to understand something fundamental about human nature. We often don't grasp the value of stability, loyalty, and deep feminine energy until we're faced with the emptiness of its absence. So when a man realizes you're no longer emotionally tethered to him, when you've stopped looking back, stopped reaching, stopped hoping, it rattles something foundational inside of him. That's not about you, though. It feels personal. It's about the psychological structure he built and what your peace deconstructs. When he first walked away or pushed you away, there may have been a sense of control, even superiority. Whether he left because he thought the grass was greener or simply because he couldn't face his own inadequacies, reflected in the intimacy you offered, the decision brought him temporary relief, freedom, or so he thought. But that freedom was often based on an illusion that you'd stay emotionally available, hurting but waiting, fractured but within reach. Your suffering to him provided a kind of quiet reassurance that he still mattered, that he still had access, that door was never truly closed. But when that door finally closes quietly with dignity, it changes the game. No yelling, no bitter posts, just peace. That calmness becomes deafening. And what makes it worse, from his psychological perspective, is that your peace implies that his presence wasn't essential to your happiness. Not only are you okay, you're better, stronger, maybe even joyful. For a man who derived part of his identity from being needed or desired, this becomes an existential wound. You see, men, especially those with unexamined emotional immaturity, often tie their worth to being irreplaceable in a woman's life. And when you demonstrate that you can replace him with self-love, peace, purpose, community, or even silence, it doesn't just bruise the ego, it devastates it. You didn't have to scream. You didn't have to beg. You just grew. You turned inward, healed what he didn't even have the courage to face within himself, and you transformed.
And now, when he sees you in that light, your laugh brighter, your skin clearer, your energy centered, he can't help but be haunted by the realization that while he stayed the same, you evolved. And so the psychological fallout begins. He starts to remember not just the physical connection or the conversations, but the essence of your presence, the way you forgave, the way you saw him, truly saw him despite his flaws. That kind of memory is dangerous for a man who never learned how to nurture or protect what was sacred.
Now, you've become the symbol of what he couldn't hold on to. And ironically, you're at peace while he wrestles with regret. But there's more at play. Your peace doesn't just remind him of what he lost. It challenges his ego in the most primal way. You need to understand, men are raised, directly or indirectly, to see themselves as the center of a woman's emotional world, not maliciously, but because society reinforces the idea that male presence is pivotal, almost like women orbit around their influence. So when you remove yourself from that orbit, when you no longer seek validation from him, it disrupts that deeply ingrained belief. It's not just uncomfortable, it's destabilizing. He might tell himself he doesn't care, that he's fine, but every time he hears your name spoken kindly, every time he stumbles across a photo where you're glowing, every time mutual friends mention how well you're doing, something inside of him tenses. because it contradicts the narrative he told himself that you needed him more than he needed you, that you wouldn't thrive without him, that maybe, just maybe, you'd always be lingering in the background of his life. An option, a backup plan. But you weren't a backup. You were the foundation. And now that the foundation has been rebuilt for you, by you, his sense of superiority dissolves into something far more uncomfortable, insignificance. And here's the truth. He may never admit it, not to you, and not even to himself. Your peace offends him, not because it's wrong, but because it exposes him. When someone is still living in turmoil, they expect others to mirror that inner chaos. Misery thrives in shared dysfunction, but you chose something else. You chose growth, solitude, a sense of identity beyond the relationship. And that makes him feel small, not because you shamed him, but because you no longer need him. That absence of need, it's not cold. It's clarifying. It says, I have become enough for myself. And for a man who once believed he was the center of your world, that realization is soul-shaking. Because deep down, he knows he never did the work to become the man who could stand beside a woman like that. And now it's too late. There's a peculiar thing about memory. It doesn't just replay moments. It reinterprets them through the lens of loss. And that becomes especially true when a man sees you've moved on peacefully, completely, and without the chaos he expected. He begins to romanticize the past, not because it was perfect, but because now, in contrast to the emptiness of his present, even the most mundane details of your time together start to carry an emotional weight that he didn't recognize before. And that's the great tragedy of blindness, the inability to see the value of something until it's no longer yours to hold. You see, we all build narratives in our heads. He had one, two. Maybe he told himself that you were difficult, that you didn't understand him, that the relationship was stifling, or that he needed space to find himself. Maybe he justified his absence, his betrayals, or his emotional distance with a self-serving story, one where he was the misunderstood protagonist, and you were just a chapter in his journey towards something better. When he sees you now no longer waiting at the emotional doorway, something cracks in that narrative. He starts remembering the things he pushed away, the way you listened when no one else had the patience, the way you still showed up even when he didn't deserve it, the way your laughter filled the quiet spaces in a way that made life feel bearable. And that memory becomes dangerous because it's no longer just a recollection. It becomes a source of longing, and worse, a point of regret. Not the kind of regret that passes quickly, but the kind that lingers, the kind that interrupts him when he's alone, when he's scrolling through his phone at night, and stumbles on a picture of you smiling with people who now get the version of you he never took the time to appreciate. That smile, it's different now. It's not seeking anyone's approval. It's not dimmed by his dismissiveness. It's free. And that freedom reminds him of what he lost, and perhaps even more haunting, what he will never get back. It doesn't matter how much he convinced himself that walking away was the right decision. When he sees you living, not just surviving, and doing it with quiet strength, that romanticization of the past kicks in. Every argument starts to look less like a problem with you and more like an inability within himself. Every moment where you asked for emotional presence, which he once labeled as too much, now appears in the rear view as an opportunity he squandered. The voice that once irritated him because it asked him to rise, to show up as more than just a body, now echoes with a kind of painful nostalgia because he realizes now that you didn't just want love, you offered it in abundance, consistently, even when it wasn't reciprocated. And the irony, you've already processed all this. You've lived it, mourned it, healed from it. You've gone through the fire and found your way to stillness. But he's just arriving at the place you were months or years ago. He's starting the journey you already finished. And that imbalance is crushing because he's not catching up to you. He's watching you disappear over the horizon while he's standing still, haunted by a reel of memories he can't rewind or rewrite. The pain of this kind of realization is profound. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's the kind that settles in your chest and doesn't leave. Because now he sees your worth not as a concept, but as a consequence. The consequence of neglect, the consequence of arrogance, the consequence of assuming you'd always be there. But the regret isn't the deepest wound. There's something even more jarring that takes root when he sees how much you've grown, how far you've come. It's not just that he remembers the past. It's that your current self exposes how little he's changed. While you've done the inner work, faced the pain, built resilience from the rubble of your shared history, he's likely still in the same patterns, running from the same truths. And that realization, the one where he sees your strengths shining and realizes it came from the very pain he caused, is one that hits like a wave he can't swim against. Because now every success you embody, every ounce of confidence, every smile that isn't shadowed by his presence, it all reflects back to him like a mirror. But not a mirror that flatters. No, this one shows the truth, that while you turned your pain into wisdom, he remained distracted, superficial, complacent. He didn't do the work. And now, that gap between who you are and who he is no longer bridgeable. What hurts most isn't that he lost you, it's that he lost access to a future with someone who was willing to fight for him. Someone who believed in him even when he doubted himself. And now that you've stopped fighting for him and started fighting for yourself, he's left to contend with the reality that he no longer inspires that kind of belief in anyone else. That you were the exception, that what he took for granted was rare, sacred even, and it's gone. Now his only recourse is to watch from a distance to see you celebrated, seen, loved, maybe even by someone else. Someone who recognized in you what he never slowed down enough to appreciate. And that's not just envy, it's grief. Grief for what was, grief for what could have been, and most painfully, grief for the man he could have become had he just held on, had he just leaned in, had he just done the damn work. But your growth isn't just a memory of what he lost. It's a spotlight on his stagnation. Because every level you rise to, every new version of you that emerges, is proof that pain doesn't have to destroy. It can refine, it can elevate. And while he's still stuck cycling through the same emotions, the same mistakes, you've built something sacred from the ruins, not out of spite, not for revenge, but because you finally realized you were worth it. Always were. And now he sees it too. And that might just be the most haunting truth of all. When a man realizes you've moved on, not just in words, not in performative declarations, but in the quiet, immovable calm of your daily life, he often doesn't respond right away. He waits, he watches, he calculates, and then one day you get a message. A subtle reach. A text that says, "Hey stranger," or "I was just thinking about you." A voice note with a laugh that's supposed to disarm you. It's not random. It's not harmless. It's an attempt to reinsert himself into a space he used to occupy. Perhaps carelessly, perhaps destructively, but with a certainty that you were always within reach. This attempt is less about rekindling love and more about reestablishing relevance. There's an instinct in people, especially in men, who once held emotional control or served as the object of emotional investment, to test whether that influence still exists. The logic is simple but deeply flawed. If I can still get access to her, then I never truly lost her. And that illusion feeds ego. It makes him feel less like he failed and more like he simply stepped away from something unfinished. But what rattles him, what disorients him, is when that door doesn't open. When your reply isn't eager, when there is no reply at all. When the thread that once tied you to him, emotionally, psychologically gone, and this is where the psychological shift takes place. He's not only faced with your growth, but now he's forced to confront his irrelevance. You've removed the emotional invitation. You're not angry. You're not hurt. You're just done. And that kind of detachment, that kind of boundary isn't cold. It's clarity. It's hard-earned. It's deeply earned, and it's immovable. In the face of that, his usual tactics fall flat. The jokes that used to disarm you now feel tone deaf. The charm that once pulled you back now seems tired because you've evolved. You're not the same woman he left behind. You felt the fire. You've learned what peace costs, and you're not about to sacrifice it for a few crumbs of nostalgia. And so confusion sets in. He wonders, why isn't this working? He thought you might still be carrying a little hope, a little hurt, something he could play into. But instead, he finds a woman who no longer needs closure, a woman who gave herself the forgiveness he never offered, a woman who no longer lives in reaction to his decisions. And that disturbs the narrative he's carried, one where he could always come back, always have a place, always be welcomed in some way. But you're not welcoming chaos back in. You've rearranged your life in such a way that your emotional house is clean. Your energy isn't up for grabs, and your heart, it's not a revolving door, it's a sanctuary now. One that only opens to those who earn it. Fully, with consistency, with presence, with humility. Not everyone qualifies anymore, especially not the ones who once treated your love like it was disposable. And that, perhaps more than anything, is what finally shatters the illusion he lived in. The belief that he could always come back. That your love was unconditional, no matter how many conditions he broke. Because now he sees that your silence isn't a game. It's your freedom, and he has no map to navigate it. No tools to deconstruct it. Because what does a man do when the woman who once cried for him no longer thinks about him? He might get angry. He might act confused. He might try to guilt you. I thought we had something real. I still care about you. But those words are no longer currency because you realize that care without action is manipulation, and affection without consistency is just a leash made of honey. He doesn't understand that love, true love, requires more than desire. It requires work, presence, vulnerability. And those are things he either didn't know how to offer or chose not to. And now watching you thrive, watching you glow, watching you build a life where he's not even a shadow, that absence of his presence is not just noticeable to him. It's unbearable. But it doesn't end there. Because your peace, it isn't just personal, it's reflective. It acts like a mirror, and what he sees in it is not flattering. In fact, it's terrifying because while you sit in your stillness, he's spinning, still chasing, still proving, still performing. He's in the constant motion of someone who hasn't yet learned to sit with himself. And your stillness, the deep earned kind that only comes after surviving something that could have broken you, is something he doesn't understand. And what we don't understand, we fear, we resent, we feel exposed by. Because your peace is not just calm, it's confrontation. It confronts him with everything he never faced. Every emotional shortcut he took, every opportunity to grow that he passed up in favor of ego or comfort or distraction. And now seeing you at peace, not pretending, not performing, but genuinely content, he realizes he's been running in circles. You got off the wheel, you've healed, you've rested, you've risen, and he's still caught in a cycle of avoidance, confusion, maybe even denial. Your peace shows him that it was never about winning or losing. It was about growing. And while he mistook your silence for surrender, it was actually transformation. It was you choosing you. Not because you stopped loving, but because you started loving yourself more. And now every time he thinks about you, he doesn't see someone he can control. He sees someone he can't reach. And that distance, that space where there used to be emotion, that quiet confidence you now carry, that's the real loss. because you didn't just walk away. You evolved, and evolution isn't something you can reverse. It's a one-way door. Once you see your own worth clearly, you can't unsee it. Once you taste peace, you refuse to settle for noise. Once you realize that you are the home you were always searching for, you stop begging others to stay. And so he sits with that truth that no matter how clever his approach, how casual his re-entry attempt, or how familiar his presence once was, it no longer matters because he's not entering the same woman's life. And the woman you've become, she has no room for people who only show up to see if the door is still open. There is a kind of reverence that only emerges when someone finally sees what you've become after they've lost you. It's not admiration in the traditional sense. It's deeper, more sobering. It's the recognition of value they couldn't grasp when they had it, and the brutal awareness that that value has now evolved beyond them. It's not just that you're stronger, it's that your strength is no longer contingent on their approval, their validation, or even their presence. That realization is not just humbling. It's devastating to someone who once believed they were central to your world. For a long time, maybe even decades, your identity might have been wrapped in the roles you played for others. Partner, caregiver, peacemaker, the one who held everything together while you were slowly coming apart. The one who gave second chances. Not because they were earned, but because you believed in potential. You didn't just love him. You invested in him. You built with him. You made space for him to become more than what he was. And somewhere along the way, that emotional generosity became expected, not cherished, not reciprocated, just assumed. But then something shifted. You reached a point where the weight of self-sacrifice no longer felt like love. It felt like abandonment of yourself, of your boundaries, of your voice. And so you did the thing he never thought you would. You stepped back. You got quiet, not in resentment, but in reflection. You began the long, hard journey of rediscovering the woman underneath all the emotional labor, the one who existed before the wounds, before the roles, before the need to be needed. And now he sees her. Not the version he remembers, but the one he never took the time to know. The one who found her worth not in what she could give, but in who she is. The one who set boundaries, not to punish, but to protect the peace she bled for. The one who no longer chases closure, but instead lives in wholeness. And that image, it shakes him. Because it forces him to reckon with a simple, crushing truth. You didn't become who you are because of him. You became who you are in spite of him. This creates a psychological tension that's hard to ignore. On one hand, he wants to celebrate your strength. On the other, it reminds him of everything he failed to nurture, to honor, to understand. There's a profound loneliness in that realization because he sees now that what he once dismissed as too emotional, too intense, too much, was actually the language of depth, the language of truth. And now that you no longer speak it to him, now that you've redirected that energy inward, he realizes how rare it was, how sacred, but it's too late. And he knows it. What happens next is rarely acknowledged, but it's deeply human. He begins to mirror you, maybe not consciously, but instinctively. He starts dressing differently. He begins quoting books or ideas you used to talk about. He starts referencing growth, spirituality, balance, things he once scoffed at when you brought them up. He's not doing it to mock you. He's doing it because he sees that those things work, that they've made you magnetic, composed, grounded. He wants that for himself. But here's the paradox. He wants the result of your journey without walking the same path, without the nights you cried yourself to sleep, without the therapy, the reflection, the accountability, the forgiveness, not just of him, but of yourself. That's where his efforts fall apart. Because this transformation you've undergone, this radiance that now surrounds you, it didn't come from performance. It came from breaking open, from examining every wound, every pattern, every lie you believed about yourself. You earned this evolution. And when he tries to mimic the result without honoring the process, it rings hollow. It doesn't land, and deep down, he knows it. But it's not all about him. In fact, the most powerful part of this chapter is that it's no longer about him at all. That's what he feels most. Your life isn't oriented around his presence or absence anymore. You're not healing, so he'll notice. You're not glowing, so he'll regret. You're simply living fully, authentically. And that kind of self-possession, that quiet certainty, is intimidating. Not because you're trying to be, but because he has no framework to engage with a woman who no longer defines herself through proximity to a man. You've become the kind of woman who walks into a room and doesn't need to say a word because her presence already speaks volumes. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You choose. You decide who gets access, who earns your time, who matches your energy. And that shift from seeking to discerning is a seismic one, because it means you're no longer operating from a place of deficit. You're not filling voids. You're protecting your abundance. This shift is spiritual. It's emotional. It's psychological. And it's visible. People feel it when they talk to you. They sense the peace in your eyes, the clarity in your voice, the unapologetic joy that doesn't ask for permission. And for the man who once took your light for granted, this is both awe-inspiring and unbearable. Because now you're no longer accessible in the way you once were. Not just physically, but emotionally, energetically, spiritually. You've elevated beyond the frequency of dysfunction, and he's still learning how to tune into his own. There's a kind of sacred finality in that, not bitterness, not revenge, but acceptance. You've made peace not just with what happened, but with what will never happen. And in doing so, you've closed a chapter. Not with slamming doors, but with gratitude. Because even though it hurt, it also taught. It refined you. It clarified your values. It stripped away illusions. And it gave you back to yourself. And now you move differently. You speak differently. You love differently, because your love is no longer an offering to prove your worth. It's an expression of your worth. It's discerning, it's deliberate, and it's rare. And he sees that now. But it's too late, because the version of you he sees today isn't one he can return to. She wasn't built for him. She was built after him. Because sometimes the greatest gift a broken relationship can offer is the opportunity to become someone who never settles for anything less than soul-deep alignment. And that, more than any punishment, is the final consequence. He doesn't just miss you. He misses the chance to grow alongside you. And that opportunity? It's gone. So what happens when a man sees you've moved on peacefully? He sees everything he lost and everything you gained. But more importantly, you see everything you deserve. You see your strength, you feel your clarity, and you own your peace. If this message stirred something in you, I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had that moment when your silence spoke volumes, when your peace became your power? Drop it in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We're building a space for real conversations, real growth, and real healing. Got a topic you want me to dive into next? Maybe something personal, something raw? Tell me in the comments. I'm listening. Because here we're not just moving on, we're rising together.